Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum podcast. My name is Citizen Strife, and last week's episode on Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney has gotten some good reviews. I was able to talk with somebody over YouTube and get some good discussion, and it had me curious, what the reactions to these were, because a lot of people have been watching these, but other than the playthrough videos that I've been doing, there's not been a lot of people talking, people chatting. I know YouTube is a passive platform, but I was always wondering, are people watching it all the way through? Are people paying attention? Are people doing what they can? And, sometimes I'm not doing all the timestamps correctly, or I don't have the time to do, a run through of the videos themselves to make sure they sound good. Right? But Phoenix Wright was one of the first times that it felt like I was reaching some new people because I was not doing a JRPG in general. I was doing a Japanese game still, but I was doing a different type of game. And I think that's where, again, these podcasts are going to fit. They're going to be Japanese-centric, sure, but I do want to, every so often, change it up and not do JRPGs. I want to do visual novel stuff. I want to talk about the anime live-action stuff like Bebop. I want to talk about the Animatrix tie-in. And honestly, I'm excited about next month because the project I'm working on is probably going to be one of the harder ones to do. Not because I don't enjoy it, but because I'm curious to see what the reaction is going to be. And I'll say it right now up front. So we've got these anime reviews interspersed with the video game reviews, right? That's not changing, but the anime reviews for the next few weeks starting in January, so we're going to get through Goblin Slayer, we're going to get through Animatrix, but the next 3 weeks after that, we're going to do something to tie into a show that I really like a lot, and is anime adjacent, I suppose, and that is Rooster Teeth's RWBY. And I started watching RWBY a couple of years ago. They had it on Verve and, their own animation site, of course. And RWBY is one of those things where it's not anime-based. I get that. But it is dripping in anime aesthetic. It's dripping in anime voice acting and stuff like that. And the more they do it, the more that they get in bed with Funimation and Bang Zoom voice actors and the like. So you can go ahead and tell me if it's not anime or whatever. You can shut up because it is anime adjacent, and that's good enough for me. It also helps that RWBY, whether it's the comedic stuff like Chibi RWBY or RWBY Chibi, excuse me, I haven't seen it in a few months, and then the initial few seasons versus what they did a few seasons later, which was go into the more serious storyline. I actually like the serious storyline change. But that being said, when I'm tackling something as vast as RWBY, I'm not expecting people to oh my god, watch it with me or whatever. I'm coming from this from a perspective of I'm watching it back or I'm recounting having watched it back recently. And to do that, I'm going to be focusing on every single season, but what I was able to do was devise arcs that fit storyline-wise, that fit best. So RWBY is going to be cut into the first episode being seasons 1 through 3, the more lighthearted and jovial Beacon episodes where they started, their creator, Monty was still alive, and, things like that. Seasons 4 through 5, they get a story arc in a different city and things start to get serious and the main villain of the series starts showing up, so it makes sense to do those two. I'd say the last 3 volumes, 6, 7, and 8, have kind of been condensed into their own, they went to a place. Makes perfect sense that this would fit as a story arc in and of itself, but it also allows me to, when I'm doing my character and plot rundowns, I get, I don't have to talk about every single character. I can focus in on, the main 8 or 9 or maybe 10 in this case. And then central to that, I can be okay, I'm running this down because RWBY has a lot of stuff inside it And it's certainly a project that I'm interested in. Hopefully, it's something that, again, it's something different than something that we're doing today, which is Goblin Slayer Season 1. Now, I'm saying Season 1 because they announced a Season 2 after I'd made the bumper screen and whatnot. But Goblin Slayer isn't, like, super complicated. I can probably knock this out. I don't hate it. When I'm saying knock out, I'm not saying that the show itself isn't good. I'm saying that it's a fairly simplistic setup, which makes it easy to talk about. And even though I'm suffering from the COVID booster shot and whatever, I can still knock this episode out, and I think it's going to be a good one. But when I'm talking about Goblin Slayer, I have to talk about D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, because you can't really get into the show unless you're at least familiar with the mechanics, the naming conventions, or the ideas. It isn't so overt that they're playing a D&D session or something, but the ephemera and all the other things surrounding it are the gods from the gods rolled dice and the world was created. Like, come on, dude. It's D&D. The names of the characters are made from D&D. The things they talk about are D&D based, and that is a blessing and a curse, and I'll go over that in my negatives and positive section that I do. But one thing that struck me about Goblin Slayer, much like Shield Hero, was they don't pull any punches when it comes to the action sequences. And goblins, to be fair, are notoriously weak in most RPGs and whatnot, but in this show, they're given a level of threat that, because people don't take them seriously, things get really dark. And I will talk about some things in this show that may or may not be suitable. I know I tend to go into the mature, not kid-friendly stuff, so be aware that a lot of the plot and stuff in Goblin Slayer is pretty freaking dark. But I think people will enjoy it if they've never seen it, or get a refresher on why I like the show, even though it's slightly newer. It's about 5 years old. So when we talk about the brutal moments, we have to start with the Goblin Slayer himself, and he is as easy a character to understand as possible. Mandalorian destroys goblins. You don't need to think anything else. He's masked up, he's armored up, he knows what he's doing, he takes every single quest surrounding goblins because in his own weird way, his life was changed by goblins. Now he has other issues like family and, daddy issues or whatnot, but really, he's Mandalorian. So if you want to see the Mandalorian beat shit up in an adventure fantasy land, you've come to the right show. Cool thing about Goblin Slayer is he's fairly intelligent. Normally you think of these fighter types and these rangers, and again, this is where the D&D start comes in. He is a ranger. In most D&D, rangers are kind of character specific and like survivalist, whatever, but they have a feature known as favored enemy. And this guy is goblins. So much so that he knows where they go, he knows how many there are, he knows how to get rid of them, he knows what ways to get rid of them, and he very vehemently destroys them. So he gets a reputation, despite being a well-honed hunter and adventurer. He is solely devoted to getting rid of that population. It is as close to a genocidal rampage as you can get with a character against another fantasy race. Alongside him is a character known as Priestess. And Priestess is a cleric. She is the holy cleric, the healer type. She's got a staff, she's got healing magic, she's got barrier magic, all that stuff. In D&D, it's what's known as abjuration magic and healing. So, life cleric stuff like that. And she goes on an adventure with these idiots who don't know what they're in for and think, oh, it's just a bunch of goblins in a cave. What's the worst thing that can happen? We'll be great adventurers someday, and let's go. And then they find out they got destroyed and raped. Yeah. So in this show, goblins like to terrorize victims in various ways, and in most of the females, they get raped and beaten and just left for dead. Like I said, this was very serious, so you know what you signed up for if you're going to it. So Priestess was going to be one of those unfortunate victims until Goblin Slayer came by, unbeknownst to her, and just said, they're dead. He keeps account of how often he kills them and how many he kills them in a battle, so Priestess is like, who is this guy? I am indebted to him because he saved my life, and for good reason, because she saw what happened to the other females in the party, and yeah, it would have not ended well. So he takes her on, but, you know, he's like okay with her, but it's not like they like each other. It's one of those like begrudging respect kind of things. Where the negative comes in is this is an anime show, so you know that harem stuff has to get involved, so there's that shit, you know, even though Goblin Slayer doesn't really care, you know that every girl wants to fuck him, right? So there's that. And it's not just Priestess who sort of likes him and, you know, respects him and whatnot. There's another girl known as Cowgirl. She's a farmhand in a city who I think her sister was slain by goblins, and she knows Goblin Slayer personally. She's actually seen him with his mask off, and they make a big deal about him not revealing his mask, just like Mandalorian, unless the situation calls for it. Oh, excuse me. Clearing my throat there. So Cowgirl doesn't fight, but she protects her ranch with her family, and, you know, Goblin Slayer does what he can for her. And it's one of those, like, she wants him to stop, but he knows he can't and won't. But he also knows that someday, like, he understands he probably will and then settle down. So that's where the harem stuff comes in, where she's nice and she's got an inroad. It's the childhood friend kind of thing, where the Priestess is the new girl, and, you know, that's... They do enough with the harem that it's not so annoying, and it's kind of, like, nice that they do the stupid sometimes to balance out just how horrible the action scenes are. It not in a bad way, just horrifying as in a terrible. What are they doing to these goblins, and what are the goblins doing to them, and what are orcs and other enemies doing to people? You know, that sort of thing. So you need that lighthearted moment here and there. Alongside Goblin Slayer and Priestess are several party members. You have High Elf Archer. You have Dwarf Shaman and Lizard Priest. So you have your female archer. She's a ranger elf. I mean, yeah. And she's kind of snooty, but she's like Hawkeye, where she can just shoot and shoot very well. And she's got the, you know, that kind of like, if Priestess is the nice and demure lady, then Elf Archer is a bit snooty. And, of course, she likes Goblin Slayer, too, but, you know, of the three, she's probably least into him, I suppose. So it's there. But they play off each other because I think Elf Archer at least likes him enough and is like, hey, you're my party, you're my friend, let's go on adventures, and let's stop killing goblins every once in a while. Let's do something that, you know, can be fun, like going to another city and whatnot. So Dwarf Shaman is interesting. I don't know where I would classify him. Like, in his case, what he tends to do is a lot of, like, protection magic, but he also has, like, earth, like, damage skills. So he's, like, some of a wizard and also some of a protector. Like, not as direct as a healer, per se, but he can do that. Lizard Priest does the same thing. So they kind of have, like, their own magical styles. Lizard Priest has this, like, fascination with, like, cheese and milk products and stuff, and, you know, they're minor characters, but they're there to, you know, fill in the gaps of the story when need be, because Goblin Slayer himself is solely focused on killing dudes, you know, and there is that camaraderie you can build in a party, and it is a D&D party. And they have a good amount of chemistry. The actors all do really well. A lot of the actors are fairly new. That's why I haven't really done my like normal spiel of like this person voiced this person, that sort of thing. So it's a lot of new people or people I don't recognize. The closest I can get to that would be Dwarf Shaman, who was Lieutenant Yoki in Full Metal Alchemist. It was a side character. He was the snooty like officer in the gold mine place where Edward kind of screwed him out of like some gold and stuff, bit part player, but the actor himself is pretty good. But again, it's like there's not a lot I can dig into, like who did what and what show and whatnot, like I usually do. So that's kind of neat. It's neat that the longer I keep going, you still have that staple of, oh my God, I've heard this person for 30 years, but you get this new crop of talent and you get these new things, and it's like, oh, it's kind of neat. A couple other characters that show up are Guild Girl. Think of the lady from Konosuba who runs a guild and gives adventures, like her thing. The way they at least give the guild in this show a little bit of change isn't just that they post quests. They actually have a ranking system for adventures as well. So you can go from, I think it was like porcelain or something really chintzy, all the way to platinum. And a lot of the higher ranked people are silver and gold. I know most of the main characters here are silver based, which means they're very seasoned adventurers with like 5 or 10 years experience, maybe even 20. And you still have that outcropping of the noobs who are really unsure. So you get a lot of like feedback in the bar in the guild where these new guys are talking to Goblin Slayer, or they're talking to like 4 or 5 other people that have been seasoned adventurers and stuff, and pretty stock characters overall, but nothing that you don't like, I don't think. But the other main character is someone known as the Sword Maiden. Now, in the main storyline that doesn't involve around goblins, there's like a demon king or something, like some party we never hear of except for like one episode or something, goes and kills a demon lord or something. Way in the past, there was a lady who was really freaking good at it, who was known as the Sword Maiden. And she lives in another town, and she takes over the guild, and I think she runs like the church that priestess is actually from. So you have this crazy paladin lady who's really fucking skilled, but now because of basically blindness can't really fight anymore, but she's still skilled enough to do things. But she's an interesting character that Goblin Slayer kind of jumps off of and talks to, kind of separate from the party, which is nice because you get more and more about Goblin Slayer from other people's reactions, and then when he starts opening up to people and it starts to build things and it starts to work very well, because you have that camaraderie that's building and the chemistry between the characters that are fairly good, even though they're very stock. But then you have the action sequences, which are just insane and brutal. And I talked before about how D&D mechanics and everything makes like just everything revolves around D&D as a ephemeral idea. They don't come out and say it, but if you've played a D&D session or you watched a Critical Role or you know the naming conventions that everybody's named it, the adventures all make sense. The ranking system is the only new thing that, other than a D&D, it's like if you had a ranking system in a D&D for classes, that's basically what you'd have here, is an anime D&D. The problem runs into, and I'll talk about it now, where if you don't know the mechanics, the dialogue is not going to help you. You have to kind of infer what they're talking about when it comes to how many spell slots they have per day and what they're doing in a fight and whatnot. If you've had that experience, you slip right in and it works. The fits like a glove mentality, because people talk as a D&D session would, but it's kind of overt, and it's like big red sign right over your face that says D&D comment here, talk. And yes, they have their own characterizations too, but you get that like it's very thick and I like it because I've played D&D for 5 years, but for somebody who's never played it, it could be like, what are these names? Why are these things classes? What is it? Like, you don't need to know it, but if you don't know it, it's not like normal dialogue, because you get the sense that they're talking their way through a session, or they're using dialogue from D&D as naming stuff to tell you, play a goddamn session of D&D, like, do it. It's an advertisement. This show is an advertisement for anybody playing a D&D, and I like it, but you're not going to get helped much. So it's both a positive and a negative, because the characters are interesting, but they're not going to be more than the sum of their parts or what their character classes are. So know that going in. What I do like, again, is the brutal nature of the show. They turn goblins into this, like, not be-all, end-all, because there's more serious demons like trolls and ogres and orcs and shit, and even some gigantic demons that other people kill. But Goblin Slayer is focused on, these things will be a pack, these things will kick the shit out of you, and they will hurt you, and they will victimize you. They will violate you if you let them, so you have to kill them. And this show does not shy away from that, because if he doesn't do it, or his party doesn't do it, somebody's gonna get wrecked if they don't keep them in check. So again, that whole like genocidal rampage kind of thing, it's very understandable that this guy would have a fixation on it, but it is a little rough. But the action sequences benefit from another thing that I like about Goblin Slayer, because he is very thorough. He knows, like, their biology. He knows, like, weak points. He knows what to do. He's kind of a MacGyver kind of character. Like, he can use a certain set of stuff to do a certain thing that even, like, the other characters won't even think. Or he'll sacrifice himself, or he'll put somebody else in a certain position. He's like a field general kind of thing in the guise of the Mandalorian. He's able to just think through the solutions to all these problems, and doesn't always work to his advantage, but it's pretty good in that sense that you know that he's able to come up with a solution to every single problem they face. So the drawback that I mentioned before was the D&D stuff. It may not be for you, and if it is, it's awesome, but it's laid on thick. So I personally love it. I don't know if other people are going to like it. I also kind of like, do we need another show with harem elements? Really? Like, every show has to have them, I guess, because why not? And sure, Goblin Slayer kind of tiers them, but any female character that you know in the main party is going to glance over at Goblin Slayer, or he's going to sleep with them. And they even make a point in the show. It's like some weird resurrection mechanic, which I've never heard in D&D before. So I might as well just mention it, because it's sort of a spoiler, I guess. So, sorry, my phone was being dumb. So, early on in the season, there's like a grievous wound or some thing that goes on. And in D&D, you're allowed to resurrect your characters. It's a high-level spell, and usually it involves like getting a diamond or a higher-level rock or something that spends a lot of freaking money. They're meant to be ideal solutions to getting your character back, provided you go through a lot of effort to get them back. Or you just create a new character, which is, par for the course. They die, and usually that's it. If the party really likes the character and really wants to bring them back, they'll use resurrection and whatnot. And usually you can just revive them and whatever, or they'll revive in a different body, or, you'll find some way to do it. This show decided, okay, we weren't harem enough, so we have a solution to this problem. So Goblin Slayer wakes up in a bed, and he's with Priestess, and he wakes up with like no injuries and whatnots, and the Sword Maiden's kind of sitting there, and she flat out tells him, he's like, if you sleep with a virgin, you will be revived. And I looked at the screen and like awe, and I'm like, did they really do that? Like, I've never ever played a D&D session where it got that level of overt. The most you'd have is maybe a character or two got married, I guess. but the the characters getting married or not, they're just having sex, right? Or sleeping or whatever. And the interpretation is they slept together, and Priestess is like, oh my God, it's so weird. And it's like, really? So, stuff like that. Like, every female character has a thing for him. Like, this guy's a genocidal murderer, and he's a nice guy when you get down to it, but he's still a genocidal freak. So, like, outside of Cowgirl and Priestess, I don't see why everybody would go for him. But that's protagonist syndrome, so you gotta reconcile that, I suppose. Other than that, though, at the end of the day, Goblin Slayer is an anime D&D session. The characters talk in D&D formats, the enemies are D&D types, the stuff in the world is a D&D session. So think of it, you're watching a 12-episode D&D session. And a campaign. It's neat. I enjoyed it. It's got some good ideas. It's got some stupid ideas. I liked it. Coming from a D&D fan and, veteran, I suppose, I appreciated it. It's a little dense and a little stupid, but you get past it, and it's certainly going to be something that you watch and be like, yeah, I can really get into this for one reason or another. You get some stupid shit here and there that stick out like sore thumbs, but I think it's going to be a good watch for anybody who wants to. So that'll do it for me today. And like I said before, we have a lot of stuff planned for this podcast and whatnot. I am finally in the process of nailing down some guests. We were trying to get guests for like Super Mario All-Stars, Super Mario 1, 2, 3, and World. We're going to get that together. We're going to meet up and get that interview done, and then it will be my first ever guest spot on a podcast. So that should be nice. Hopefully I don't get called to work or anything like that, so that can happen. The week after that, we have Animatrix, which I said I am super excited for. I've got the Animatrix set up. I'm really hyped for Matrix Resurrections because Keanu Reeves has been on a tear recently, and who knows? It could be a mistake, or it could be an awesome trip down memory lane. But I do know that Animatrix itself is awesome, so I'm not going to be disappointed rewatching that and talking about it. After that, I could do Breath of Fire 3. I could do Mega Man X. I have that planned. But if I am able to, I'm going to try and nail down another guest so we can talk about Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past Randomized, which is a speedrunner's version of Legend of Zelda. It's very popular on Twitch and YouTube, and anybody who's seen a randomizer probably knows what it's in for. So I'll see if I can track down the guy and see if we can do it. If not, I'll try and get to that at some other point. And of course, after that, RWBY. So I'm going to watch a couple more shows, but after that, I'm going to have to dig RWBY out and watch what's going on to 8 seasons of RWBY. I watched it, once or twice, so I know about it. But to dig into it and really get to the meat of why I like this show so much, and maybe even talk about RWBY Chibi and the like silly sitcom animation version of RWBY. There's a lot to like. And there's a lot coming up. So I hope people enjoy these podcasts and keep sending me good reviews. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. If this stuff is your kind of thing, I'm really appreciative because I grew up with this every single time. And I say this every single time. This is what my bread and butter is. I don't venture too far off the beaten path. And I know it's not something for everybody, but for people who do enjoy anime, Japanese video games, and this is stuff that I really revel in and enjoy talking about and playing. So we'll get knee deep in this the further we go, and I have no intentions of stopping anytime soon, but it always keeps going, and I'll see everybody next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.